Hello, Mr. Lunny, and
Good
welcome
afternoon.
back to our ladies' high school. You were a pupil at our ladies' high school before you taught here. What was your time here as a pupil?
Oh, I thoroughly enjoyed it because I was here for 6 years and great fellow pupils and great staff. Everything, and thoroughly enjoyed every minute the whole time.
That's good. How did you feel like when you first came back to your old school as a teacher?
Well, I was only away for 5 years, so I was very familiar. It was almost just a break for university and college for 5 years. So I left in 1955 and came back in 1960. So there was hardly any time to have forgotten memories or anything. So it was a very simple transition from university student days back to school.
That was a while back.
It was a while back. It's a long time ago.
What are some of your strongest memories about your time in our ladies' high school?
Strong. Mostly, I think, through football. I got very much involved with football from my very first year right through until almost around about the time I finished. Started with a juvenile team, and then they won competition down at where the present Cathedral Primary is built. There was a football park there, and in that area there was a park that was used by the local authorities for cup finals. And my very first team was an under-13 side who won the Lanarkshire. It's called the Cameronian Shield, big shield, square shield. And it's in memory of the Cameronians, who were the Scottish regiment fought in the last war. And after that, I was involved in football year after year. And then finally, I was involved with Mr Friel, who was a PE teacher at that time.
Yeah.
And Father Burns, who was the chaplain at that time, when we had the Shield under 18, and they won the Scottish Shield that time. And Our Ladies had a long reputation in the Shield, way back in the very early days when it was a selective school, when everybody from Lanarkshire, the only place you could come to for a higher secondary education was Our Ladies. So people came from as far afield as Cambuslang, Rutherglen, right down as far as down at way past Lanark and Biggar and so on. So a lot of people, and that team was a very good side and won the Shield. And I think that was about the 7th or 8th time the school had won it over the years. So great reputation for football. A lot of players, of course, came from the school. Matt Busby, who used to be was one of the first managers of Manchester United. He came from Bells Hill. So there's a long reputation for football, and I get very much involved in football. And most of my sporting side in the school was that way, plus other things, but particularly that was what I was, more, in a sense, mostly interested outside schoolwork.
That's really good. Are there any pupils or members of staff who stick out in your memory?
Pupils. Well, the one who's probably best known was Billy McNeil, who was only a few years behind me at school. And I can't think of any one particular person, but mostly half a dozen I could go on, and nobody particularly stands out, but several others of my contemporaries were well known to me, and that's most of my memories are surrounding them without any person standing out as different from the rest. So it's a fairly general answer.
Finally, if someone asks you to sum up Our Ladies High School, what would you tell them?
If anybody was
to sum up Our Ladies High School, what would you say?
School? Well, yes, it's got a great reputation for a whole lot of things. It's particularly because it was the only senior secondary Catholic school up until more or less 1970, the start of the 70s. That's 50 years ago now you're talking about. So, and it had a whole range of people. I mean, we're talking about somebody very recently who turned out to be quite famous, was a young lad who was blind, almost totally blind, and he worked his way up through, going through to national certificates and so on, right through to become a graduate. And he was back here as a teacher in the English department. And eventually, after he left, he turned out to be a circuit judge down in England. And Mr White, who was the deputy head up until I left, he looked after this laddie when he was here, particularly as a pupil. He was a pupil, and then he became the English teacher. And during all that time, John looked after him because he was quite limited in movement and so on, but he was very, very successful and very popular. And as I said, turned out to be a superstar at the end of the day.
That's amazing. And Mr. Lunny, is there anything you'd like to add about your time in Our Ladies?
Well, it was so varied, you know. I mean, I started teaching classics, and then when classics started, that's Latin and Greek, once it began to disappear, then I got interested in computing. And I went on a course one day a week to Jordan Hill for 2 years, I think it was, and came back and started the computing department. And I was involved with them for about 8 years. And there was 2 or 3 other, Mr Murphy and Mrs Mulholland, who are all retired now, of course. But I met recently at the funeral of Tony Quinn, the former head teacher.
Oh.
I met them recently. But those 2 that I mentioned there were involved with me in my last 8 years doing computing. And RE, did RE as well, of course. I remember we introduced RE certificate with some lunchtime classes. I can't remember what the date of that was, but we had 2 or 3 people who were quite interested, and we've had some sort of tuition during lunchtime, and they were presented for, I don't know what grade we were at, with so many variations from O level right through to standard grade 5 and so on. And so sometime in the middle of that, we started RE classes and did the certification for the first time. So those are the main differences from any other things that I've mentioned.
That's good to hear.
The year I came to Our Ladies, 1949, was the year the school chapel, War Memorial Chapel, was opened. And it was the brainchild of 2 former members of staff who had fought during the war. In fact, they fought at Anzio in down the Italian coast, and they had vowed, apparently, on their way home to commemorate their pals who had died. So they got the thing going, and when I arrived, the chapel, they had been raising money through all sorts of devices in the school, and they were able then to get a chapel set up in an annex in the old building, and it was quite a small place, about a quarter of the size of this here, or maybe half of the size of this, and the crests on this roof of the various 12 Scottish regiments. In fact, those regiments are depicted on the blinds over there, and there's the one odd one out, which is, I'll leave you to work out, it's an English one, but the other 11, is it 11? 10 or 11 altogether. And there's one odd one out, which is, I think, all the rest are Scottish, and they were on the ceiling of the first chapel, and there was the statue of Our Lady, which became very famous because it was moved around once or twice in exhibitions in UK, and the 2 large murals were painted by artists who were very much involved. A husband and wife team, in fact, were involved very much in the production of the statue and the murals. And the chapel then had to be moved in 1974. Well, we had to think of changing it 74 because the school was going to be taken over by Motherwell College at that stage. So in the early 70s, there was a trustees set up. I can't remember the date when the trustees were set up as such to look after the chapel. But to cut it down to its shortest, the trustees were involved in the negotiations for the building of the new chapel when this new school was being built. And eventually, after some toing and froing, the cost of £30,000 to rebuild the chapel was to be split between the trust and the local authority. And that was agreed to. And we then had to make £15,000 over so many years. Now, the £15,000 was made up in 2 years by a whole variety of things, including a boxing night in Motherwell Civic Centre, which made £4,000. Now, in those days, that was a lot of money. And ever since then, the chapel is used annually for the memorial mass to celebrate the names of all the pupils from Her Lady's High School who fell in the war. And my name's actually in it because my uncle Charlie was killed, but not in the war itself. But they were flying practice missions down in the south of Scotland, and they crashed in a hill just outside Gatehouse of Fleet. He was killed there, so he's one of them. And a lot of other people who are local, I've got their connections there. And a man called Joe O'Raw. Now his daughters were all, family were at the school. His son had 2 or 3 daughters. One of them taught in the primary school. And he was very much involved and went into an awful lot of research and produced a couple of booklets. If I can remember, I'll bring one of them in and let you see them. And he was very much in getting various bits and pieces done, particularly gathering of the names and getting them inscribed on. There's a booklet in the chapel on a stand which you can read the names of. And there's a mass, as I said, every last Thursday of November, 27th of November this year. The bishop comes each year, and all the relatives that we can contact of those who are named in it come along. Now, as time has gone on, they're obviously getting older and older, and a lot of the contacts have disappeared. Gone to heaven, I suppose, today, the day to say it. You know, they're all holy souls now. But that's where all the names came from. All those who had died had been former pupils in the school, and then later on discovered that at least a few people who had been at the old St Joseph's Secondary School in Motherwell here, they themselves had been, nobody ever thought of them, because we always thought that they were too young at that time to be involved in the war. Because St Joseph's had been going a while. It was very unlikely that MD the leaving age at that stage would probably be about 14. So there are very few people who would be former pupils going straight into the army. So their names were missed out. But latterly, it was decided to contact people that thought we might be, and there's 4 or 5 names have been added. The most famous, in a sense, of the names on that list are the Cadden twins. Now, the 2 Cadden twins, there are 2 Cadden twins just now, both play for Hibs. And they're the 2 wingers in Hibs at the moment. And they had, is it granduncles or great uncles, twin Caddens, who were killed within 6 months of each other in the war. Can you imagine a mother there? The two killed, she gets news for one killed, then 6 months later the other one. 2. Well, and now these boys, I think I don't know what their first names are compared to the ones in there, but it was quite interesting that the two who died were twins, and these are the 2 twins following them on. I think there must be 2 generations apart. So they're probably, in a sense, the most famous of the people on the list in there, apart from myself. I forgot to mention when we were talking about my involvement, I got very much involved with the school magazine eventually. The school magazine was a very significant booklet because in the days when we were selective, it was the one way of knowing where most of the former pupils had gone, because a teacher who was one of the teachers when I was a pupil, a Mr. Jake Carlin. His son, John Carlin, was also a teacher here. He was a pupil. He was a pupil of mine, and then he was also a teacher in the English and History department. And all those people were very much involved in contributing to the magazine, which became an annual production and was quite a substantial booklet of. But the Jake Carlin Senior, he was the one who followed up former pupils, because in those days the numbers going from Catholic education into senior studies was relatively small. But nowadays, if you go to any of the results of universities, you'll find page after page of names, and probably 10, 15, 20 from our ladies spread over them. In those days, the total for the faculty of maths, for example, would be 2 or 3 maybe, and for hires and for other subjects there would be 10s, 12. One of the biggest groups, of course, was the numbers who went from, at my time, from the second year to the priesthood to Blair's up in Aberdeen, which is now closed. That was one of the biggest involvements of all former pupils. But the magazine was the history of what had gone on for the year before, and was, when you look back on, they're very informative, because they cover all the years when I was a pupil and when I was a teacher as well. And I remember there was a Catholic secondary school, the ladies, there were no girls in it in those days,
Yeah.
when it was very liberal, you see. Oh, sorry, it became... when the other school catered for the girls, of course, were Ellenwood Secondary over in Bothwell. So a few in the primary school, the Catholics boys went to our ladies, the girls went to Ellenwood. And we used to sell magazines to each other school. Boys would go over to Ellenwood to sell the magazines around the classes. The girls would come here. And of course, it was a great incentive for both sexes to get the chance to go and sell magazines. So that was another memory that I perhaps should have mentioned as well. And I was business manager for a wee while on the sale of the books, so get very much involved with them.
That's good to hear.
Okay.
Mr. Lunny, thank you so much for being with us today. It was great to hear your memories of Our Lady's Eye.
Thank you.